to this webinar on national advocacy ahead of the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group, which is organized by the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, GAROP, in partnership with the International Federation on Aging, IFA. I'm Nena Yorhanji from Age Platform Europe and a member of the GAROP steering group, and I will be moderating this webinar today. This is part of a series of webinars to support civil society organizations to engage with the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. It aims to improve advocacy with governments and other stakeholders at national level, and to strengthen your own direct participation and contributions to this process. The next session of the Open-Ended Working Group will take place between the 6th and the 9th of April in New York. We know from previous sessions that the hard work and campaigning done by NGOs at national level has had a real impact on the debates that are happening in the Open-Ended Working Group sessions and the extent of support and positive statements made by member states and other stakeholders there. Now, I cannot stress this enough. We often think that all that matters is what we do in New York during those 4 days. But in reality, there's very little that we can achieve unless we take up action the weeks that lead up to the UN session in order to engage with governments and support the preparation for the session. So this webinar aims to do exactly that, to explore what kind of national advocacy by NGOs will be most effective between now and the 11th session in April. Your work at national level can make a huge difference, even if you're not going to be physically attending the session in New York yourself. So we're privileged to have with us today an excellent panel of speakers, including Denise Hauser from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Eli Mugamoisema from Rwanda, and Heidrun Mollenkopf from Baxter in Germany. So we will begin with the 10-minute presentation by Denise, after which we will take a few questions from you. Then we'll hear 2 presentations of 5 minutes each from Eli and Heidrun, and then we'll have another round of questions from you for all the speakers. Now, I want to stress that if you want to ask a question to the panelists, you need to use the Q&A function that you will find on your screen. So you'll write your questions using that screen, and it will allow us to make sure that this is addressed during the webinar. And if for some reasons we are not able to address it today, we will try to address it after the webinar is finished. But if you use any other function, like the chat function, your question may not be addressed. So please make sure that you use the Q&A function to raise your questions. Please note also that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available shortly on the website of the IFA and on GAROP's website. Now, before turning on to Denise, I'd like to briefly introduce her. So Denise has been working for the past 14 years in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. She has been working in different locations, covering different areas and different groups of rights. And she has been very active more recently with regard to the rights of older persons. And she's one of the key stakeholders in this process. So we're very delighted to have Denise with us today to explain what you can do as NGOs at national level. Denise, to you.
Thank you, Ali. Firstly, good morning. I know for some of you will be already good evening. And I really wanted to thank you for this invitation and for organizing this event. And I fully endorse what you have already said, how this fundamental, this national engagement by NGOs with local national governments before the open-ended working group. So, and I wanted to go through some key areas and some suggestions on how this could be strengthened and the real impact that this having and might have for the next session. Firstly, very briefly, I know that you all are very much familiar with the mandate of the Open-Ended Working Group, but I just wanted to recall again that this working group was established 10 years ago, with a specific mandate that was reinforced by different GA resolutions to look at and consider proposals for adoption of international legal instrument to promote and to protect the rights of other persons. That's why one of my first points is it's very important to have this clarity of why are we discussing the need for international convention on the rights of other persons, and also how much an international convention on other persons can have a huge impact at the national level, influencing and guiding national policies in relation to adoption of national legislation or adopting a variety of policies really to protect the right of other persons. And in the past few years at the Open-Ended Working Group, we have been selecting specific thematic areas every year to identify really the core content on what will look like, really an international convention on each specific areas. Which is very brief in introduction, just framing the work of the Open-Ended Working Group. I wanted to focus on what exactly could be the engagement with the governments and with the other groups at the national level. Firstly, what has proved very effective, and understand that many of you are already engaging, but it proved really important if national NGOs and partners should meet the concerned government offices at the national level, being the foreign ministry or other ministries who are responsible for these issues, and also ask about what are the government's positions in relation to the mandate of the Open-Ended Working Group, how they are preparing for the next open-ended session, and propose that should be a multi-stakeholder consultation at the national level prior to each of the sessions of the Open-Ended Working Groups. And that I make a point because governments submit the inputs on the thematic areas that normative areas that will be discussed at the Open-Ended Working Group, the same as the NGOs and other stakeholders. But that would be very useful if this initiative could really involve a broader group of stakeholders and NGOs really to take part and to discuss what exactly is needed at the national level and in one international convention on these topics. And also in this engagement with member states, I will encourage that member states send their experts from the capital to take part in the discussion on the Open-Ended Working Group. And that proved a huge change, because what we notice is you can find politicians and ministers that are fully really supported and committed with the right of other persons, and even will endorse an international convention. But when you arrive in New York, not a message sent by delegates or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs might be different. And as you are at the national level, you could, facilitate building this bridge between different ministries or maybe different positions in the government. That would be, could have a very important impact. And also identify who are the key parliamentarians who can build political support to the Open-Ended Working Group process, and also pressure the government in this regard. And here, just give a recently example that we participated at the meeting organized in Abuja, but by a network of NGOs, the Stakeholder on Aging. And we had a specific session with the ECOWAS, with the parliamentarians of the ECOWAS, to discuss the right of other persons. And that is something that we could explore or could be replicated at the national level, how we engage with the parliamentarians, with the Congress, and really to sensitize, to explain to what is the human rights of other persons, what is missing, and why we are advocating for such an instrument, plus national legislations as well. And another, and in connection to that, in the countries where, in the regions where you have a regional human rights instrument, such as the African Union Protocol on other persons in Africa, in the Inter-American Convention on Protection on Human Rights of Other Persons, it will be fundamental really to advocate for those both instruments to get into force, because they provide very much in detail what is the content on the human rights of other persons. And if you have the regional instrument that is already in force, that can be already applied and used, could have a huge influence at the national level, but as well to influence the discussions here in New York. So that's with engagement with the governments. My second point, very briefly, I think my time is almost over, the engagement with the open-ended working group itself. The two topics this year will be, the thematic areas will be the right to work and access to the labor market and access to justice. And on the normative discussion will be the two topics from last year, education, training, and lifelong learning, capacity building, and social protection, social security. It was extremely helpful to receive your writing inputs that allow us really to provide more solid documents to inform these discussions. But as well, I was very much encouraged if you could have some key messages and recommendations under each of these thematic normative areas, but what are your main substantive aspects to advocate for each of these rights? Why exactly we need this international instrument? What's missing? But what will be the content of this right that you want to be seeing discussed at the next open-ended working group? And I would definitely encourage as much interventions and advocacy. It'd be very the open-ended working group. And just to be finalizing, that I don't see my time is over, the engagement also with the national human rights institutions. How the NGOs at the national level could partner with the national human rights institutions in the submitting the information, but also coordinating intersessional events and discussions before the open-ended working group, organizing side events or other activities during the next open-ended working group. And finally, it could be also helpful to identify what are the key UN regional and national agencies at the local level. And that is also part of my work to facilitate and to work with you. But to engage some of the key UN agencies, also to advocate for the human rights of other persons, and also to engage with members of the government, and really to create, to raise the voice of other persons at the national level. And also finally, I wanted to say that what is, really fundamental, this amazing work that you are doing at the national level in this advocacy, and also bringing the voices of other persons to the open-ended working group. And that was the fundamental reason of the existence of the open-ended working group, and how we can better strengthen the instruments to protect the human rights of other persons. And other persons needs to have their voice heard at the open-ended working group, and that is that is done through the work that you are doing. So I hope this was helpful, and I'm looking forward to our exchange, and thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Denise. I think this was a brilliant overview about you mapped very well the kind of engagement that the NGOs can have at the national level, from engaging with government, engaging with elected representatives like members of the parliament to put pressure on the government, engaging with other members of civil society, including national human rights institutions, and engaging with the open-ended working group itself. So you have given us already some concrete steps for our way forward. I'm wondering if colleagues and participants have any questions. If you do, feel free to send them on to the Q&A function. While you do that, perhaps I'll ask Denise if she wants to comment on the process around the accreditation of NGOs to the open-ended working group, and what you think might be the added value of NGOs accrediting to the open-ended working group. What rights, let's say, this might give to them, because we may have among the participants some NGOs that are not currently accredited to the open-ended working group, and it will be relevant for them to know what this means, especially for those that want to come to New York, but also for those that may not be in a position to come to New York, why it might be interesting to accredit to the open-ended working group.
Well, I really encourage all the from NGOs to be part and to accredit for the open-ended working group. And I mean, if and definitely if there is the possibility to be present during the open-ended working group, that can have and is having a very important and great impact. When you are accredited, I don't know exactly what are the details that we want to know, but when you are accredited, you have the possibility to really actively participate, and what I just mentioned, also to take floor, to make interventions, and really to express and to engage with the participants and member states, and really to combine what are the voices of other persons from the national level, but what are really the key messages that you want to, member states to be discussing and to endorse during the open-ended working group. And just one more thing that I forgot to mention before, but very important. At the last resolution of the older persons, it was included that at the end of each session of the working group, participants will adopt agreed recommendations. It's still to be defined exactly the name, is an outcome document or agreed recommendations, but it will contain the key elements of the rights that have been discussed. And I think the participation of the NGOs during all the process and make intervention and making sure that they messages are combined and heard by member states could be reflected at this agreed recommendations at the end, and that could be important impact in moving forward with implementation of the mandate of the open-ended working group.
Thanks, thanks, Denise. I see that we already have some questions coming in, so I'd like to raise them with you. We have Catherine Peters, who says that they have trouble coordinating with different ministries in their advocacy, and there's often a disconnect between capital and mission in New York or Geneva, and was wondering if you had any suggestions about how to make that process more efficient.
Yeah, that is one of the main issues and the challenges that we have observed. That definitely some of the delegates and the Minister of Foreign Affairs are not necessarily aligned with some opposition of the key ministries at the national level on charge of the other persons. That's why one of the strategies that I would suggest is really to advocate and to encourage and to push that the member states send the experts from the capital to come here and to be part of the discussions. For example, that we had, for example, last year, some countries at the Ministry of Health was the one taking the lead, and they were fully supportive for the convention. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had a different position. So then encouraging not the high-level person for the Ministry of Health come here and to represent the state. And that could add a huge value for the substantive discussion, but also a huge value in changing position and having more allies among member states to support implementation of the mandate of the open-ended working group.
Thanks, Denise. There are a few questions that are more specifically to tactics and advocacy efforts, so I may keep them after we have the presentations by Ellie and Heidrun, because that may give you already some ideas. I want to raise very quickly a question about whether organization having ECOSOC status automatically become accredited to the open-ended working group, and the answer to that is no. You have to make go through the separate process of accreditation, and I'm sure we can link to the notes of this webinar, the link about how you can do that. It's pretty easy. Let me check if there's something more in terms of the process and general issues that we can address here before we go into the tactics. There's a question by Steve Robinson about whether we should move away the discussion on from normative elements and going into looking more at the content of the convention rather than just the drivers, because this process has been going for a long time and could be extended indefinitely. I don't know, Denise, if you have any insights about whether we will continue with this process or any other suggestions about to move this way forward. Of course, later on, we can also address this from the perspective of NGOs and others that are involved in this process.
If I understood correctly, precisely in the past two sections, we move one step forward from the more thematic discussions to include a separate specific panel on the normative elements of the specific themes that were discussed in the previous session. That was precisely one step forward to come closer to a proper normative discussion for a convention. So that's precisely was the objective, being more clear. When we have this panel on the normative elements, and as I say, Sharon, we are preparing the background documents. That is a huge opportunity for the NGOs to present what are their proposals of how a convention will look like under these areas. For example, now we talk about access to justice and the right to work. When we will have the panel discussion on the normative elements, you can be vocal is saying, look, under the access to justice, these are the content that is lacking at the national legislation or the other international human rights instruments. So we need a convention that says that on the access to justice, for example, the justice systems need to have a specific approach to the other persons in these areas. So that is the opportunity for you to engage and really to advocate for the convention giving the substance, what do you need? No? And I see that is the best way to move forward.
Thanks, Denise. So before I raise the final question to you and we move to the next speakers, Sylvia Perelovin actually made a very valid point that had been mistaken in my previous answer regarding whether NGOs that are already accredited, that have the ECOSOC status, need to have accreditation to the open-ended working group. So Sylvia mentioned that if an organization has ECOSOC status, they do not need to be accredited to the open-ended working group. They nevertheless need to register for the specific session if they want to attend that session. Thanks, Sylvia, for making this difference. However, that also means that if you do not have ECOSOC status, you can still be accredited to the open-ended working by following the online process that we will link to you to the notes of this webinar. Thanks, Sylvia, again, and I hope it's clear now. And the last question for Denise, and like I said, the rest of the questions we'll keep later after we hear from Ellie and Haijun, is how is the work of the UN Working Group on Aging connected to the work of the WHO, including in terms of the decade of healthy aging?
We are working very closely with the WHO, in particular thereby, well, not only from OEWG and more my colleagues in Geneva, the process happening there, but there's our colleagues and other sites of the UN, and that is very linked and very connected. All the initiatives in the decade, we also could explore and identify what events or other activities we could organize in the context of the decade, also to advocate more specifics of some rights of other persons, connected to the access to the right to health, etc. So that's something that we could definitely explore. And it's not only the initiative of the World Health Organization, the decade, but there are other initiatives of other UN agencies. ILO, we work very close together to advance, the rights connected to social security, etc. So we are connected, and that's I was saying that at the national level, it could be, I mean, very helpful also to the work of NGOs to identify, to establish some alliances, and also to push some of the UN entities at the national level to advance on the rights of other persons in different fronts, connected with I love they have presence, WHO or CHR. So, and we could create the momentum also at the national level and use these tools.
Thanks again, Denise. So we may come back to you after we hear from Ellie and Haijun on some specific points. In the meantime, I'll hand over to Ellie, who will share with us his experience from advocacy in Rwanda.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm happy to share with you the experience we have from Rwanda advocating for the right of older people. What I can say is that some tips we are relying on. First of all, we do our best to know the government's priority so that we link aging with them, because otherwise they will never hear from us. Another thing is the team working among advocating CSOs, because here we have the culture to work as an umbrella, to work together. So we need to join others in order to raise the voices for other people, and good collaboration with the government as well. And what we do is to know how to select the keywords and who to talk to and how. And another thing from our experience is never give up. So for this time, what I can say that we consider the importance of a strong relationship among stakeholders and having one voice for effective advocacy. So Sindagiza organization and its partners and other actors, we adopted to strategize by adhering to participate actively to the social protection technical working group led by the Ministry of Local Government, and also to the National Commission on Human Rights and this CSO's platform. So these two platforms help us to advance the ideas and to talk about aging, because it is not something that is among the government's priority. So as we receive the information ahead of time from Heritage International and GAROP, we immediately inform the government and the National Human Rights Commission so that we suggest the themes before they get any other idea. Because, you know, if they, for example, during the celebration of the International Day of Elder People, we know what is going to be we are asked or we are contacted to suggest the theme. So we use the information we have about the open-ended working group sessions or topics that are under discussions. So that is what we did for example, for this year. The theme we consider in the discussion topics in the, for this year was access to justice and decent work. So this we suggested both to the government to be the theme for the International Day of Elderly People in Rwanda. So we were lucky that one of this one on decent work was accepted, and the theme was 1 week national campaign from September 28th to October 6th, and under this theme of decent work, on decent work. During the campaigns, Sindagiza worked closely with the MINALOC, or this Ministry of Local Government, and the National Commission for Human Rights, which strengthened their commitment to make the written submission, and they did. At least now, last year, the government of Rwanda made a written submission, and this year as well, and the National Commission for Human Rights. So I can say that working together and keep a good relation with the government and adhere to the existing platform and technical working groups helped us really to influence or to lobby for the government to make to consider this theme of the open-ended working group during the International Day of Elderly People. Yeah, so it worked. Maybe it can work in your country, or you can try other strategies, but this is really something that I can say that it has been successful in Rwanda. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Eileen. It's a very interesting example because you use the political momentum of the International Day. And I think one of the points that we need to take from your presentation is actually that national advocacy is not just about ensuring support for a convention. There are many ways that we can influence governments to be more engaged in this process, and this is very, very important regardless of whether the particular government is also supporting the need for a convention. These are, you know, intermediate steps that we need to take before we actually ensure that we have also support for a convention. And you highlighted this in your presentation because, like you said, in your case, finally, for the first time, the Rwandan government has submitted written contributions to the open-ended working group, which is critical to advance the discussion forward, to show support from member states for the mandate of the open-ended working group and continue the constructive discussions. I'll just, I'm sure there will be questions to you as well, but I'll move directly to Germany and Heidrun Molecom from BAXO, who is a member of the board of BAXO, and she is also NGO representative at the UNEC Working Group on Aging. And BAXO has a similar experience in that they managed to bring together NGOs and HRIs and government representatives for in their advocacy around an open-ended working group. So you'll hear more from her. Heidrun, to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm also quite happy to be able to present to you in Germany. First of all, I would like to explain what BAXO is. BAXO is the German National Association of actions, federal level, state, and at municipal level. Important to know that BAXO was founded already 30 years ago. This means that we have a long-lasting connection and good contacts with all the relevant federal ministries. And to have these trustful contacts, I think, is very important for an impact and being in exchange with them about what's going on, and of course also me.
Heidrun, there are some cuts in the connection.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you at a place where there's good Wi-Fi, or can you move elsewhere, or is it? At some moments we hear you very well. I know this just cuts a little bit, so you can continue and see how it's going. But if you can move somewhere with better connection, go ahead. If not, go on as it is. You are muted, Heidrun, in case you're speaking. We cannot hear you. You're muted. I think you're still muted. Heidrun, do you have any other technical problems getting back into the webinar? Is there any way to unmute the Heidrun remotely?
Why doesn't it work? Before it worked well.
Now we can hear you, Heidrun. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So I don't know what do I have to repeat? Do I repeat from the beginning?
No, I think that you can go on explaining what you started to say in terms of how you worked at the national level.
Yeah, okay. Preconditions of a good cooperation with the ministries and other NGOs is from research, practice, and politics. The workshops are organized by the Human Rights Institute and the Ministry, and we, as well as the experts, contribute to the topics. And this is important because on the one hand, we learn a lot about what is going on, what is the reality in our country, where are gaps in legislation, what is the experience of the practitioners. And on the other hand, it is important for the politicians to hear about all this. And based on these workshops, and additionally on the input which we get from our member organizations, we can complete our answers to the questionnaires which are sent by the chair of the open-ended working group. Sometimes the deadlines do not allow for the whole process. At least we can use all this input for preparing our statements for the sessions in New York. So we can base on what the experts say from research, from organizations. We can use the input of our members. So this is what we do before the sessions. And after the sessions, a so-called debriefing takes place, organized by the Human Rights Institute and the Ministry. And this is a report back to the experts on the one hand, on the other hand, and what I think is even more important, civil society organizations. This is on a higher level, on a medium level, so to say. And we, as BAXO, do this reporting also at national workshops to relate the results of the open-ended working group back to those who often do not see the relevance of the effort made at the UN level for their daily work. And progress with the new binding instrument for the rights of older persons, I think it is most crucial that we can see what the results mean for the life of older persons. We have to raise their understanding and more of their support. So this means that we have to strengthen our efforts as NGOs to both sides. First, urge the policymakers to support a convention and to support them in their efforts as soon as they are convinced. Because this was one of the questions we had before. It's not just one ministry or one person who is responsible. They have to connect with all their colleagues from other ministries. And so it is important for them to have the support of civil society. So this is one side. But the other side is to make older persons and their organizations aware of their rights and empower them to claim for their implementation. So I hope you could hear me now. And yeah. Thank you very much. And I'm ready for questions.
Thanks, Idrun. We did hear you a lot better at the end. I'll maybe take just a couple of minutes to summarize your key points in case some have had trouble. So very briefly, Idrun gave us a very good example from Germany, where they have workshops, meetings between NGOs, policymakers, national human rights institutions, but also experts involving academics and others, before and after each open-ended working group session. And what she highlighted was the highly participatory approach of these meetings, which are instrumental in terms of first building together actual contributions to the open-ended working group, so that are reflective of the views of civil society, but also take into account of the views of experts at the national level, but also as an important learning process for all the stakeholders involved. And there are also debriefing sessions after each open-ended working group, where those that have participated in the session in New York are able to go back and bring more visibility to what has been happening in New York, the concrete outcomes, how this might inform policy at national level. But also just bring more general awareness, in particular among older persons organizations, about what are older people's human rights, how they can use human rights to claim for their rights. I will just go directly to the questions then that will be addressed more generally, I think, to all of the panelists. I was wondering if Heidrun and Ellie had any insights in terms of concrete arguments to governments about the need of a convention, because there are a few questions around that, where in general governments may be open to the idea of the human rights of older persons, but might be rejecting a convention. So if you had any intelligence to share with other participants on that, that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what I can say is that we didn't need to push again, because this is something that is not really, that doesn't attract the attention of the government, because for Rwanda, the most priority is children, youth, and women. So that is why I was saying, even the little that is being done is something that we build on to continue pushing. Otherwise, for example, we try to advocate for the government to attend the sessions of open-ended working group, but to this stage, it is hard. We even contacted the mission in New York, but even when they go there, it is like 1 hour or 30 minutes, and they go. So it's not really a priority, but we are pushing, as at least they started to make written submission, and they allow other people to come and discuss about it, and even they know, because before they didn't even know what we are talking about. So it is not a priority, but we keep pushing using the strategies that I was sharing with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Heidrun, is there anything you would like to share from that, from your perspective? Although I know that the German experience is not necessarily focusing on the need for a convention, but rather constructive engagement throughout the process. If you wanted to speak, you would have to unmute yourself. Perhaps then we move on to some other questions. I think that the majority are, again, more about the arguments around the convention. One more specific aspect to that might be in cases where there is already a regional instrument, like is the case of the African Protocol, and how we may link this with the campaign for a new convention. Heidrun, did you want to add anything to this discussion?
Yeah, if you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. For us, it is very important to be able to show concrete examples at national level where to protect older persons. One example is, or important, was when we discuss the issue of misuse or neglect of older persons. We could show that also in Germany we have this where older persons who are in dependent situations, dependent on long-term care, for instance, not enough protected and cases of misuse and power. So examples might be now the present topic about the access to work. We know that workers and employees who lose their job have difficulties to get a new job, even if they are only 45 or so, not already in the middle adulthood. And to show this, we are more convincing than whether if we speak only in a very general way.
Thanks, Heidrun. So yeah, you highlighted how it is important to make very clear the link between the themes of the open-ended working group and what is happening at national level.
Yes,
that is key. There are a few questions that are more of a general nature in terms of challenges around older people's rights, but I'd like to keep them for later and first address that have to do really with advocacy efforts. So perhaps one question might be if there is one action that the NGOs can take before the next question, what should be that action in the next few weeks? And here I raise that question to all the panelists, including Denise, that spoke before. So what would be the most important action for NGOs to take between now and the next open-ended working group session, in your opinion?
Hello?
Yes, Sally.
Yeah, if I can say something, I think it is not too late. Maybe the limitation could be maybe the budget that is not including those meetings. Otherwise, I think right now, if it is possible, we can still organize one-on-one meetings with the decision makers in charge of elderly people and explain to them what is this about, because some of them they don't even know what it is. So we need to go to their offices to explain to them, and again, as I was saying, to use their priorities. If it is if the priority is is youth, we can explain to them the link, the intergenerational approach, linking elderly people and youth, so that we continue, never give up. They may not understand today and tomorrow, but after tomorrow they can. So that is what I can say. Just we go there, we organize meetings with them, using even the media, because sometimes we don't even know who is in charge. That is a problem. But since you know, you can just organize the audience and meet with them to explain.
Thanks, Sally. It was a very useful, very practical suggestion, but also answer some of other questions we had in terms of arguments. And one of the objections to the convention might be a fear of intergenerational conflict. And like you say, we need to make it clear that the human rights of older persons are not about separating older persons from the rest of society, but about ensuring equal rights for everyone. So it's not about affording different or more rights to the old compared to younger generations. And we need to bring everyone, including the young, into this debate. Would anyone else from the panelists want to contribute to this question?
Yeah, the question related to the next open-ended working group, I think it would be important, and we should try to convince our national states to make sure that we have enough time to speak. Usually, the states have the first priority, and very often they talk very long. There is not time enough for the human rights delegates and NGOs to raise their voices.
Thank you. Yeah, Heidrun, that is true, a really practical concern that NGOs have. I'm conscious of the time, so perhaps I'll just ask a last question, and I'm conscious that we didn't answer some of the questions, but like I said, these more refer to general substantive issues of the human rights of older persons, and perhaps we can take them another time. The last question I wanted to ask perhaps Denise is about we are expecting some documents coming out from the UN in the next few weeks in preparation of the next session. Perhaps you can provide any advice about how NGOs could be using those documents in preparation of meetings with governments and other stakeholders at national level to support their advocacy.
Many thanks, Helen. I think now you can hear me, no?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I will answer your question, but just like very briefly from what you asked before.
Yes.
And on the question how this better engagement with the national level and the advocate for the convention, what I would suggest, maybe it will be much easier to approach, to engage with member states, not really like advocating for the convention, that could be a later step, but identifying what are the key human rights concerns in your country related to other persons, and how you can really reinforce and work together. For example, on social protection, social security, we are observing in many countries in Europe, Latin America, and Africa is a setback on the rights related to the social security, and is an opportunity for a youth engagement in saying, look, no, that is the context of the aging population. That is what the substantive, rights that we need to be reflected at the national legislation, the national policy, how to advocate, and that could be a bridge for later advocating. So we need a convention, because there is this gap that is not contemplated in the current national policies and legislation. But I would say the fundamental aspect is how to better protect the human rights of other persons. No, the discussion must be framed on the substantive elements, and that I connect with the documents. The same, we are about to release in a few weeks the background documents for the two thematic areas, the work and access to justice, and the two normative elements that were discussed at the last session. That could be a good framework to identify there in the engagement with member states, saying, look, on the access to justice, this, based on the inputs provided by member states, inclusive, these are some areas that need to be strengthened, and that we identify those some weaknesses. So how can we discuss in the national context, what are the policies, what are the national legislations that are needed really to reinforce the rights of other persons? And the open-ended working group is an opportunity for the NGOs to make statements and maybe to have some clear messages saying, when we have the discussion, for example, on access to justice, so this is the main gaps in the national legislation, and we wanted to make these changes reflected and engage in this more substantive discussion also with member states. But I definitely would support to use these documents, to mention them during the discussions, and come with your key messages on how to move this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. We have to close up soon. I just need I'll make a final comment because it has been raised by one of the participants that it is important to include also directly older persons themselves, and not only organizations that represent them, but also make sure that we have actually older persons involved in the discussions. And this is indeed crucial and something that the open-ended working and the chair and several delegations have already highlighted. I think we will close now because we have reached the end of our time. This has been a remarkably interesting discussion. We can, of course, continue the discussion bilaterally and in different forums and ways. We can exchange views and good practices in advance of the open-ended working group. So this is definitely not the end of the discussion. And we hope to see many of you as well as possible to the next open-ended working group. Indeed, we know that the voice of civil society and of older persons themselves is what is making a difference in this process. We need to convince more governments to support the convention. And this is actually the time to make that real difference and to influence the 11th session. So I strongly encourage you to take some of these suggestions into account as you plan the next steps at your national level. I remind you that NGOs can apply for accreditation for the open-ended working group until 10th February. We will be able, hopefully, to include in the notes the link to the accreditation and explain how this happens, what is important. I know that the GAROP website already includes several information to that, so we will communicate that to you so that you're able to do that if you're interested. And I just want to say that at least from my experience, being accredited can add weight to your national advocacy efforts. So I would really encourage you to do that even if you do not plan to go to the open-ended working group this year. So thank you once again. Thank you to the panelists for their insightful presentations, for responding promptly to all the questions. Thanks to all the attendees for your active participation, and a good luck to everyone with your advocacy work over the coming weeks. Finally, a huge thank to IFA for hosting this webinar and for their continuing support. Thank you.